Chapter 11. The Battle Brother suddenly twisted, breaking free from Zavas's grasp with a surprising burst of agility. His ceramite-armored elbow whipped around, catching the captain's jaw in a sharp, ringing strike that snapped Zavas's head to the side. For a moment the crowd fell silent. Then Zavas laughed, a deep, thunderous sound that echoed through the training deck. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, but his eyes blazed with fierce appreciation of the blow. "Good strike, brother," he growled, wiping the crimson trail with the back of his gauntleted hand. The Battle Brother didn't waste time with words. He lunged forward again, but this time with a more calculated approach. His massive form seemed to coil like a spring, ready to unleash devastating kinetic energy at the precise moment of contact. Nearby, a young servitor continued to record the match, its augmetic eyes capturing every nuanced movement of the two warriors. The commissar had now moved closer to the edge of the makeshift ring, his augmetic eye scanning the combatants with a clinical precision that betrayed decades of martial experience. Zavas shifted his weight, his centuries of combat experience manifesting in how he read the incoming attack, not just with his eyes, but with an almost prescient sense of his opponent's intent. As the two warriors continued their intense sparring, the Battle Brother feinted left, then drove his right fist in a lightning-fast arc toward Zavas's midsection. The captain's arm moved almost faster than the eye could follow, intercepting the blow with a precise block that sent a resonant clang of ceramite against ceramite echoing through the training deck. The crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch. Marines from different squads pressed closer, their earlier bets now forgotten in the pure spectacle of martial skill unfolding before them. Even the deck crew, typically focused on their mundane tasks, found themselves transfixed by the display of superhuman combat prowess. Zavas pressed his advantage, using the blocked strike to twist his opponent's arm into an uncomfortable angle. But the Battle Brother was no novice. He rolled with the movement, using the captain's own momentum to break free and create distance. "First blood to me," the Battle Brother rumbled, referencing the earlier strike that had drawn blood from the captain's lip. Zavas's response was a predatory grin. "The match isn't over, brother." The commissar shifted, his augmetic eye recording minute details of their technique. To the untrained eye, this might have looked like a wild brawl, but to those who understood the art of combat, this was a dance of precision, strategy, and centuries of refined martial training. A young Marine near the edge of the crowd leaned into an older veteran. "How long have they been fighting?" he whispered. The veteran's weathered face creased with a knowing smile. "Longer than you've been alive, recruit." "Much longer." As the bout continued, the Battle Brother's earlier explosive energy began to wane. His movements, once precise and calculated, grew increasingly ragged. Centuries of combat took their toll, even on an enhanced transhuman warrior. His breathing came in heavy rasps, barely audible beneath the ceramite of his battle helm. A wild, desperate swing erupted from the Battle Brother, the telltale sign of a warrior whose endurance was rapidly depleting. The uncontrolled arc of his fist created exactly the opening Zavas had been waiting for. As the brother charged forward, the captain moved with liquid grace. He ducked low, sliding on his ceramite-reinforced knees across the metal deck. The wild swing passed harmlessly over his head, leaving the Battle Brother momentarily exposed and off balance. In that instant of vulnerability, Zavas's gaze locked onto a training sword that lay on the ground nearby. With a fluid motion that spoke of countless hours of practice, he rolled to his feet, snatching the sword as he came up in one smooth movement. The blade sang through the air as he brought it up in a practiced flourish. The crowd went silent once again. The Battle Brother froze, realizing he had just been outmaneuvered. Zavas stood, the training sword held in a perfect combat stance, a predatory smile playing across his blood-flecked lips. "Shall we continue, brother?" The training deck held its collective breath, waiting to see how the battle brother would respond to this sudden shift in the engagement. As the bout continued, the battle brother's earlier explosive energy began to wane. His movements, once precise and calculated, grew increasingly ragged. Centuries of combat took their toll, even on an enhanced transhuman warrior. His breathing came in heavy rasps, barely audible beneath the ceramite of his battle helm. A wild, desperate swing erupted from the battle brother, the telltale sign of a warrior whose endurance was rapidly depleting. The uncontrolled arc of his fist created exactly the opening Zavis had been waiting for. As the brother charged forward, the captain moved with liquid grace. He ducked low, sliding on his ceramite-reinforced knees across the metal deck. The wild swing passed harmlessly over his head, leaving the battle brother momentarily exposed and off balance. The practice sword Zavis was wielding stopped just short of the battle brother's exposed neck. A collective gasp could be heard throughout the training arena. The captain wiped the blood from his face with the back of his armored hand. He then extended that hand to the battle brother. "What's your name, warrior?" Zavis asked, his voice a low, resonant rumble that carried across the now quieting training deck. The battle brother clasped the captain's outstretched hand, their armored gauntlets meeting in a gesture of mutual respect. The crowd began to disperse, returning to their duties, but the electric energy of the bout still hummed in the air. "Kyle," the battle brother responded, his grip firm as they clasped hands. "Kyle Novan, from the 3rd Assault Company." Zavis nodded, studying the warrior's face. Blood and sweat traced lines across Kyle's features, testament to the intensity of their sparring match. "You fight well, Brother Novan. Your technique is sharp, though your endurance could use some work." A few nearby Marines chuckled, but there was no malice in the captain's tone. It was the frank assessment of a commander who had seen countless battles and trained generations of warriors. The commissar approached, his augmetic eye still scanning the two combatants. "An impressive display," he said, his voice clipped and precise. "Captain Zavis, a moment of your time." Kyle stepped back, awaiting dismissal, but there was a newfound respect in his posture. He had faced the captain in combat, and while defeated, had not been found wanting. Chapter 12. As the room began to empty, Marines and crew members exchanged credits and settled their wagers. The clinking of coins and murmured conversations gradually faded as personnel returned to their duties. The commissar waited patiently, his stern gaze shifting between Zavis and Kyle. Zavis nodded acknowledgement, signaling he would speak with the commissar momentarily. Turning back to Kyle, the captain spoke. "I'll be having a word with your commanding officer in the morning. You're dismissed, Brother Novan." Kyle snapped to attention, a crisp salute acknowledging the captain's words. "Yes, sir," he responded, then turned and strode from the training deck, the echoes of his ceramite boots gradually fading into the ship's ambient noise. As Kyle departed, Zavis turned to the waiting commissar, ready to hear what message or orders he might have. The commissar studied Zavis, a hint of sardonic amusement crossing his weathered features. "Your chapter's traditions continue to fascinate me," he said, his tone dry but not unkind. "You can beat each other near to breaking in combat, trade blows that would kill a lesser man, and yet maintain such emotional discipline." Zavis raised an eyebrow, waiting for the commissar to elaborate. "You just fought with everything you had," the commissar continued. "Brutal, uncompromising. Yet now you'll speak professionally, discuss tactics, evaluate performance. No rage, no personal animosity. Just—" The commissar paused. He gestured with a gloved hand, searching for the right word. "Discipline." The captain's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. The traditions of the Salamanders chapter ran deep. Combat was a form of communication, of testing, of mutual respect. Violence without hatred, strength tempered by control. The commissar grunted, not in disagreement, but in contemplation. They found a table away from the main clusters of personnel, a small bubble of privacy in the bustling hall. "The Krieg are different," he said, more a statement than an argument. "We are bred for one purpose. War is not what we do. War is what we are." Zavas took a measured bite of his meal, his eyes distant for a moment. "And yet," he said softly, "even in war there must be something more than simple destruction." As they sat, Marines and crew members began to pass by their table. Each offered a variation of congratulations to the captain. A young servitor paused. "Well fought, sir," it chirped mechanically before moving on. A Marine from another squad approached, giving a crisp salute. "Impressive match, Captain Zavis. Brother Novin put up a good fight, but you showed true skill." Another group of deck crew members nodded respectfully as they passed, one muttering, "Never seen a takedown quite like that." The steady stream of acknowledgments continued, each interaction brief but filled with genuine respect. Some offered a simple nod, others a quick word of praise. Through it all, Zavis remained composed, accepting the congratulations with a measured grace that seemed as much a part of his martial training as his combat skills. The commissar observed silently, watching how the captain interacted with those under his command, each interaction a subtle demonstration of leadership. As he ate, Zavis became increasingly aware of the physical toll of the sparring match. His lip throbbed, the metallic taste of blood still lingering, and he could feel the swelling around his eye beginning to tighten the skin, a subtle reminder of the combat's intensity. The thought drifted through his mind that perhaps he had indeed been spending too much time away from direct engagement with his warriors. Administrative duties, strategic planning, and command responsibilities had slowly pulled him from the front lines and training grounds. The upcoming games suddenly seemed more than just a military exercise. They were an opportunity, a chance to reconnect with the visceral reality of combat, to test himself alongside his brothers, to feel the raw pulse of martial challenge that defined their existence. His gaze drifted around the mess hall, taking in the faces of Marines and crew. Each one a potential combatant, each one carrying the legacy of their chapter. The bruises forming on his face were not marks of defeat, but badges of continued readiness. The commissar, observing his contemplative silence, waited. Several battle brothers approached the table, their massive frames causing nearby crew members to subtly shift aside. Without hesitation, they sat down alongside Zavis and the commissar, their movements casual yet precise. The commissar's eyebrow raised slightly, a hint of confusion crossing his features. "Captain," he said, his voice low, "on most imperial vessels, junior ranks do not intrude upon senior officers' dining space." Zavis turned to the newly arrived battle brothers with a nod of acknowledgement, then faced the commissar. "On the battlefield," he said, his voice carrying a depth of conviction, "there are no ranks when the bolters sing. You fight, bleed, and die next to your brother." He gestured to the Marines who had joined them, then looked directly at the commissar. "Why should eating be any different?" The two battle brothers, one with a fresh scar tracing his cheek, the other with intricate flame-like tattoos visible at his neck, continued their conversation, seemingly unaware of the philosophical moment they had just punctuated. The commissar sat back, processing the captain's words, the simple yet profound statement of brotherhood that defined the salamander's approach to warfare and companionship. Chapter 13. The commissar set his drink down with a sharp clank, his face contorting with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "This," he began, his voice rising, "this is not imperial code. This casual disregard for hierarchy, for proper military protocol." His hand swept across the table, indicating the battle brothers who sat so casually alongside their captain. The salamander's way of doing things goes against everything I've been taught, everything I believe is right. Several nearby crew members glanced over at the rising tension, but quickly returned to their meals when they saw it was the captain's table. The commissar's voice continued to rise, his passion evident. There are protocols, there are regulations. Chain of command means something. But then, mid-sentence, he seemed to deflate. His tirade slowed, his voice lowering. He leaned back, the fire draining from his eyes, replaced by something closer to genuine contemplation. "And yet," he said softly, "it does work. I just don't understand." The Battle brothers continued their conversation, seemingly unaware of the officer's internal struggle, while Zavis watched the commissar with a patient, understanding gaze. Zavis listened to the commissar's outburst with a calm patience. When the man's tirade subsided, he spoke softly but with firm conviction. "It is always welcome to voice your opinions," he said. "Perspectives add value, but what will not be tolerated is the dismissal of how we live." He paused, picking up a small nutrient cube from his tray, turning it between his massive fingers as he gathered his thoughts. "Take fish, for example," Zavis continued. "A single fish is weak, easy prey, vulnerable. But when they form a school, they become something entirely different, stronger, united." The captain's gaze swept across the table, including the Battle brothers who sat with them, then returned to the commissar. "There is no hierarchy in that school," he said. "Only togetherness, only survival. It doesn't have to make sense. It simply works." The commissar said nothing, but his posture had changed. Where before there was rigid judgment, now there was a hint of contemplation. The commissar remained silent, processing Zavis's words. The metaphor of the fish school seemed to resonate in a way his imperial training had never allowed him to consider before. Around them, the mess hall continued its steady rhythm of movement and conversation, a living example of the interconnectedness the captain had just described. One of the Battle brothers who had joined their table, the one with the flame-like tattoos, chuckled softly. "The captain speaks truth," he said, his voice a low rumble. "On Nocturne, we learn early that survival is not about individual strength, but collective resilience." Zavis nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of his Battle brother's words. The conversation had shifted from confrontation to something deeper, a sharing of philosophical perspectives born from different but equally harsh crucibles of experience. The commissar's fingers traced the rim of his drink, his earlier rigidity slowly dissolving into something more contemplative. Imperial doctrine had always emphasized strict hierarchy, but here, at this table, he was witnessing a different kind of order, one built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken understanding. The commissar's gaze drifted across the mess hall, taking in the scene with new eyes. Marines, crew, servitors, each moving with purpose, each part of a greater whole. "Your chapter is different," he said finally, the statement neither a criticism nor a compliment, but a simple observation. Zavis allowed a slight smile. "Different is not always bad," he responded. A servitor approached, collecting empty trays with mechanical precision. The Battle brothers continued their quiet conversation, occasional low chuckles breaking the ambient noise of the mess hall. The simple intimacy of the moment spoke volumes about the salamander's approach to brotherhood, a connection that transcended rank, that saw strength in unity rather than separation. The commissar seemed to be working through something internal, his previous rigid posture now more reflective. Whatever judgment he had arrived with was slowly being reshaped by what he was experiencing. Zavis and the commissar rose simultaneously, their movements deliberate. They carried their trays to the cleaning station, each depositing them with practiced efficiency. The metal trays clinked against others, a small symphony of military routine. As they walked through the ship's corridors, the earlier intensity of their conversation had mellowed into a companionable silence. Their footsteps rang in counterpoint, the captain's heavy, measured tread alongside the commissar's more precise gait. At the junction where their paths would separate, Zavis paused. "Rest well," he said to the commissar, a simple farewell that carried more weight than its simple words might suggest. The commissar nodded, a gesture that was part acknowledgement, part respect. "Until tomorrow," he responded. Then they parted ways, each returning to their respective quarters. Two warriors from different traditions, momentarily united by a deeper understanding of what it means to serve. The ship's corridors absorbed their departure, returning to their usual quiet hum of mechanical life and distant ship sounds. Chapter 14. In his quarters, Zavis stood before the viewport, watching the infinite expanse of void slip past. The stars seemed to stretch endlessly, each one a distant reminder of humanity's reach across the galaxy. He removed his command insignia, placing it carefully on the small shelf beside his bed, a ritual performed countless times before. The conversation with the commissar lingered in his thoughts. It wasn't often that such barriers of rank and position fell away, revealing the person beneath the uniform. In those moments they had spoken not as captain and commissar, but as men who understood the weight of their responsibilities. He activated his personal terminal, checking the ship's status one final time before rest. The familiar green glow of status indicators painted his face in ethereal light, all systems nominal. The night shift crew had already taken their positions, maintaining the steady rhythm that kept the vessel running through the artificial night. A soft chime from his communicator drew his attention. It was a message from engineering, Chief Thorson's daily report, punctual as always. Zavis allowed himself a small smile. The old engineer's attention to detail was legendary among the crew, his reports as precise as the machines he tended. As he prepared for sleep, Zavis couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted during that mess hall conversation. The commissar's presence had always represented the watchful eye of authority, a reminder of duties and limitations. But now, he lay down on his bunk, the familiar contours of the mattress accepting his weight. The ship's ambient hum, barely noticeable during waking hours, became more pronounced in the quiet. It was a sound that had lulled him to sleep on countless nights, across countless star systems. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions to be made. But for now, in the artificial night of deep space, Captain Zavis allowed himself to drift into sleep, carried by the gentle vibration of the ship he commanded. In the darkness, the stars continued their eternal dance outside his viewport, silent witnesses to the dreams of those who sailed among them. For the first time in weeks, his sleep was untroubled by the usual phantoms of command. Instead, he dreamed of home, of nocturnes where massive luminescent fungi created perpetual twilight in the cavern cities, their soft blue-green glow washing over the carved stone architecture. In his dream, he walked the familiar paths of the undermarket, where merchants sold glowing crystals and phosphorescent wines. The faces of old friends emerged from the gentle darkness, Mira with her silver-threaded hair, old Cause tending his mushroom gardens, young Torin practicing with the honor blade. Their laughter echoed off the cavern walls, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed so deeply until this moment. Beyond the inhabited caverns, his dream carried him to the fire depths, where rivers of molten rock cast their angry red glow against the obsidian walls. There the great drakes of nocturnes made their domain, ancient serpentine creatures with scales like burnished steel and eyes that glowed like dying stars. He watched as one emerged from its lava pool, its 100-foot length coiling through the superheated air, steam hissing from its armored hide. These were the guardians of Nocturne's heart, creatures that had earned the respect and fear of his people over millennia. The wake cycle's artificial dawn found Zavis standing before his mirror, critically assessing the damage from yesterday's altercation. A dark purple bloom had settled around his left eye, stark against his dark skin. His ribs protested as he donned his uniform, each movement a reminder of every punch thrown and received in that sparring match. Years of command had taught him the art of masking discomfort, a skill he would need today. He applied the dermal regenerator to the worst of the bruising, knowing it wouldn't completely hide the evidence, but would at least dull the most obvious signs. Command presence was as much about appearance as action, and he couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, not with the crew still processing yesterday's events. After a final check of his appearance, he strode out of his quarters, his gait purposefully steady despite the protests of his battered body. The corridor's lighting seemed particularly harsh this morning, but he maintained his usual commanding pace as he made his way toward the bridge. Each step was an exercise in control over his expression, his movement, his authority. As the bridge doors slid open with their characteristic hiss, the crew snapped to attention. Even through blurred vision, Zavis noted how Tactical Officer Caney's hand moved slightly too quickly to her console, no doubt closing whatever non-essential feeds she'd been monitoring. The bridge crew's movements were crisp but carried an undercurrent of tension. News of yesterday's incident had clearly made its rounds. "Captain on bridge," announced First Officer Dorn, his augmetic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. The man's facial augments might hide his expressions, but Zavis had served with him long enough to read the concern in his stance. Zavis strode to his command throne, each step measured and deliberate. The ancient ceramite and adamantium chair had been designed for someone of his massive Astartes frame, yet today it felt particularly unyielding as he lowered himself into it. The pain from his ribs flared, but his expression remained impassive. "Status report," he commanded, his deep voice carrying the natural resonance of a salamander. The familiar words of authority helped center him, pushing away the lingering echoes of home that his dreams had stirred. "Warp currents stable, Captain," reported Navigator Phillips from her sanctified chamber, her voice carrying that peculiar echo that came from speaking through the ship's holy vocabulators. "The Emperor's tide carries us true." "Multiple contacts at extreme range," Caney added, her fingers dancing across her console's brass keys. "Aboard merchant vessels, by their drive signatures, keeping pace with prescribed shipping lanes." She paused, then added with careful neutrality, "No sign of our visitors from yesterday." The bridge crew maintained their focus on their stations, but Zavis could feel their furtive glances. They were waiting to see how he would address yesterday's violence, or if he would address it at all. First Officer Dorn stepped closer to the command throne, data slate in hand. "Engineering reports the damage to Cargo Hold 7 has been repaired. Chief Thorson requests your approval on the final containment protocols for—" He paused, checking his slate. "The disagreeable materials involved in yesterday's incident." The euphemism almost drew a smile from Zavis. Trust Thorson to find the most diplomatic way to refer to forbidden Xenos artifacts that had nearly started a war on his ship.